Depending on where you are in the world, your night skies might look whack as frick like mine does in this footage. However, if you live in a place such as Alaska, you'll be able to witness beautiful nights that appear as though colorful ocean waves are rippling throughout. Not to mention the potential to see an unfathomably large number of stars, similar in appearance to the illuminating lights of nighttime in a big city. Although on the surface, stars just look like tiny dots in the sky, they're anything but, and in today's video, I want to take a closer look at them. Starting with the sun. The star closest to our home planet Earth, and is one of the main reasons life is able to thrive here, as not only does it provide us with warmth, but through a process called photosynthesis, the various plant life is able to survive, supplying us with breathable oxygen. Suffice to say that big yellow dot in the sky is a crucial component to our ecosystems, and yet, even with this being the case, it's also something we don't think too much about because it's just there, and it's natural to us, and we can't really directly look at it for too long without our eyes hurting, so that's where these photos come in. I, of course, yoinked these pictures from NASA's website, and heading over there specifically to a page regarding general facts about the sun, we learned that it's 93 million miles or 150 million kilometers away from Earth. It has a radius of about 435,000 miles or 700,000 kilometers. We also learned here that the sun is much bigger than any other planet in our solar system, as well as how there's other stars out there many times larger than it. Lastly, at the way bottom of the page, we learn about how the surface of our sun is 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 5,500 degrees Celsius, and that the sun is considered to be a G2V or a yellow dwarf main sequence type of star. The reason I bring up all of these facts is because, given that there's tons of other stars out there in space, I wanted to highlight some characteristics most stars generally share, which are the following. They're massive in size, they're extremely hot, and that there's many different kinds of stars. While doing research into the different kinds of stars out there, I stumbled across this chart containing the different classifications of stars using a system called the Morgan-Keenan or the MK system, with said system using a series of letters to classify the various types of stars. Although this is all super cool, I'm not gonna lie, my small brain cannot compute, so we're just gonna head over to NASA's article about different types of stars, as there's respective names given to some of them, which is much easier for a wannabe smarty pants like me to comprehend. Again, there's a few kinds of stars laid out here, but honestly, there's only two from this article that I want to highlight, the first of which being the red dwarf star, specifically the one featured in this photo called the Proxima Centauri, which is the closest star to Earth following the sun, of course. Quote, red dwarfs are also born in much greater numbers than more massive stars. Because of that, and because they live so long, red dwarfs make up around 75% of the Milky Way galaxy's stellar population. Considering the title of this video, I highlighted this quote in particular because this notion of a star being born is brought up, and given that practically nothing, besides this freaking jellyfish apparently, is immortal, with birth comes the inevitable death, and the same applies to stars. And this takes us to the second kind of star from the article I wanted to highlight, called the Vela pulsar, which is considered to be a neutron star. When it comes to said type of star, essentially they're remnants of a star that was once considered to be alive, with the cause of death oftentimes being a large explosion that occurs known as a supernova. The images you're seeing on screen right now are of supernova remnants, which are essentially the leftovers of a star that has exploded. These supernova remnants are a type of nebula, and to quickly define what a nebula is, they're basically big clouds of gas and dust that are either cosmic graveyards full of the remains of stars that have died, or they can serve as a birthplace for new stars. For example, this absolute beauty of a nebula is called the Carina Nebula, and before we move on, let me just show you some more pictures of it. As I implied earlier through the introduction of supernova remnants, there are different kinds of nebulae, and although I won't go super in-depth into every single nebula type, I'd like to introduce some of them, starting with emission nebulae, which have gotten that name due to the fact that they emit their own light. Quote, this type of nebula forms when the intense radiation of stars within or near the nebula energizes the gas. The photo you're seeing on screen right now is of the Orion Nebula, which is yet another beautiful nursery full of young stars. Another star-forming emission nebula I want to show you is known as the Eagle Nebula, aka Messier 16, and when it comes to M16, according to NASA, it's located 7,000 light years away from Earth, and for those who don't know, a light year is not a measurement of time, but of distance, with 1 light year equating to about 6 trillion miles, or 9 trillion kilometers. Not only is M16 incredibly far away, but it's also massive, and these photos you just saw on screen were mere fractions of the entire nebula. The last stellar nursery I want to briefly show you is called the Lagoon Nebula or Messier 8, and just take a look at some of these friggin' awesome photos, bruh. Up until now, I've mostly been talking about nebulae that are stellar nurseries, or regions in space where stars are born. However, if you remember from earlier, I only briefly touched on the contrary when I mentioned supernova remnants as well as neutron stars, and so I now want to talk more about the various types of dead stars, but to further understand them, it's important to talk about what the typical life cycle of a star looks like. Depending on its mass, a star's life cycle can play out in different ways, with there being two general mass categories I want to focus on: low mass stars and high mass stars. When it comes to the former, with one example being our very own sun, in a nutshell, they typically have a slow and steady death, eventually either turning into a red dwarf star or a red giant when the hydrogen within its core is completely used up. From there, the outer layers are dispersed into space, forming an absolutely stunning cloud of gas and dust known as a planetary nebula, with one example being this one called NGC 2818. At that point, the only part of the star that's relatively intact is its core, and at this stage of the star's life, the exposed core is referred to as a white dwarf, with one example being the smaller of the two you see on screen right now, referred to as Sirius B, and over time this hot core will eventually cool down. This entire process of course takes billions of years, and this is a general summary of a low mass star's life cycle, but things start to get interesting when it comes to high mass stars. Similar to how a low mass star becomes a red dwarf or a red giant, a high mass star becomes a red supergiant, one example being a star called Antares. From there, it eventually goes supernova, and a couple of different things can come about as a result. Of course, the aforementioned supernova remnants such as the Crab Nebula, as well as neutron stars like the Vela Pulsar, but in my opinion, the most interesting thing a high mass star can evolve into is a black hole. This photo you're seeing on screen right now is the first ever image of a black hole, released in April of 2019. It looks like this image was taken on a friggin' 3DS. Given that black holes are essentially incredibly dense objects in which large amounts of matter are packed into a tiny space, pretty much nothing is capable of escaping it, not even something as fast as light. Black holes are an entirely separate can of worms I plan on opening sometime in the future in another video. I hope you enjoyed this one, and thank you so much for coming along with me in this journey through dead stars and nebula and supernova remnants and all that stuff. It's freaking cool. I think it's all cool. Hopefully you learned something today. I know I definitely did when doing research for this video, but anyways, I'll see you next time. Deuces.